sometimes a folk song can take you into a lot of different states of mind and being. It's not truly a linear story that you're hearing, but the different impressions of folk music and the arrangements will take you on a wild ride.
Welcome to the Acoustic Guitar Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Grizzle, sitting down for this episode with the American songster himself, Dom Flemons. On his new record, Traveling Wildfire, Flemons continues to dig deep into the roots of American music and adds his own stories to the repertoire. In this episode, we talk about both the songs and the instruments Flemons has collected over the years, and their connection to music history. Plus, Bob Dylan, Black Cowboys, Big Head Joe, and a whole lot more. The Acoustic Guitar Podcast is listener supported. Visit patreon.com/acousticguitarplus to chip in and access part 2 of this episode. You'll find that link, plus links to additional resources related to this episode in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Now, without further ado, here's Dom Flemons.
A guy told me one time, he said, if you learn 120 songs, you'll be a great guitar player. And I took that to heart, and I tried to learn that 120 songs. Of course, I got way past it, but I found that that was a great way for me to inspire myself to continue to move forward and get more songs, so that collecting songs ended up being a great talent and a great hobby to be able to have. So I found that helped me a lot as a guitar player, because if you're just looking for the minimum, that's okay. But if you continue to dig farther for the deep cuts, there are certain songs that are the 11th and 12th song on a record, and you have to go and do the deep dive to see if you can get there. Mm-hmm. And if you do it, sometimes you can find a song that will just completely change your life and change your whole outlook, one of the things that I started to do early on is I started to play all this traditional music, and I had a chance to meet a wonderful fellow by the name of Mike Seeger, and he was the brother of Pete Seeger, and he was in the group the New Lost City Ramblers. Mm-hmm. And I met Mike in 2005, and even though I was doing the group the Carolina Chocolate Drops, in my own time, I was going to Mike's house, and I was spending a lot of time with him and learning a lot about how to arrange and present traditional music. And so I spent a lot of time working on a lot of different musical ideas with Mike there. And this album in some ways was very very much in line with a lot of the things that Mike had always mentioned that he wanted to do with traditional music, is really to see it modernized and also to see the styles being represented. And he was always about styles and being very clear on how you are arranging your music and how you're presenting it. So something like Saddle It Around, that was really a wonderful way to be able to present several different styles of traditional music, and showing the vocabulary of that style within the full composition.
When did you start digging into that old-time music, and why?
Oh, well, the why was the music was intriguing. In the late 1990s, there wasn't a lot of acoustic music that was being played outside of maybe the realm of pop music, or some rock bands would pull an acoustic guitar out. But there wasn't a lot of acoustic guitar being played, especially in the folk style. So when I started to get into the music, it was before the internet allowed streaming to be a part of the music, community, if we want to call it that. I found that I was interested in these old recordings by these folk singers like Eric Anderson or Bob Dylan or Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Leadbelly, and you could go on and on. And so when I got into that music, I found that there were links. There were sort of like 3 or 4 layers of records that I could find and collect. and I could just enjoy the songs, understand the variations and the ways that they tell a story through literature. A lot of times it's through very elliptic poetry, which is non-linear, so it's not a straight A to Z story. Sometimes a folk song can take you into a lot of different states of mind and being. And
Hmm.
also, there can be a lot of interesting characters along the way. And so, I wanted to treat Traveling Wildfire in the same sort of way, where it's not truly a linear story that you're hearing, but the different impressions of folk music and the arrangements will take you on a wild ride.
Yeah, and it certainly does that. Like you said about the characters, you hear these characters in throughout the album, and it really does tell a story. And I just have to mention, like, kudos for putting together an album in a day and age where singles reign supreme. You know, it's such a complete work that you almost can't listen to one song without just letting it roll through and listening to more, at least a few more of the tunes in a row. So it's really great to hear a full, well put together album in this day and age.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just old fashioned in that way, where when I put together a record, I always think about the LP. And when it comes to a double LP, I sequenced Traveling Wildfire to fit on a double LP. So when you're listening to it, you really want to think of the first four tracks as being side one, and they're
Mm,
telling a different chapter. So they're ultimately four chapters to this this album and all the different stories that I'm telling. And so it's really intriguing as well to be able to take country music, take blues and folk, and sort of Western music, and be able to mix them together in a creative pastiche. Just take a bunch of different ideas and put them together so that they can take your ear on a journey. And that's part of the beauty of an LP, is that you have a lot of time to go through the journey that an artist might want to tell you. And of course, I wanted to do that on this one here. And I have a lot of great influences. I think of wonderful performers like the Zombies,
hmm.
or the Beatles, or even John Lennon and his solo work, thinking about some of the different sounds they were able to create. And that's something I wanted to have on this album. And of
Yeah.
course, I wanted to have country music be in the forefront, because I found that there's been such a call for um, country music that speaks of the African American experience. I wanted to just throw a couple of songs out there right at the beginning. And after uh, having a few songs about love and loss and the country and western vein, I wanted to take people on a journey through a little bit of more Americana music, and um, sort of the deep spectrum of dreams that you can find within original material, like songs like Traveling Wildfire, the title cut.
Hmm.
And after that, I wanted to still open up the album so that people could hear some of the folk styles that I'm still playing, and songs I'm still discovering as I'm traveling down the road. And so I wanted to have a little bit of Reverend Gary Davis. I found a beautiful number that's a Western number that Gary Davis used to play, and that ended up being a really neat part of it. And
Yeah, your version of that though, it's not really like his style of guitar playing though, right?
well, it's one of the beauties of listening to a lot of the old recordings of these elder statesmen of country blues music.
Hmm.
A couple of years back, a friend of mine had sent me a playlist he had worked on, um, showing a bunch of different black cowboys. And he had this one particular song, "Saddle It Around," on it. And that was the thing that really drew me to that song, is it doesn't sound like Reverend Gary Davis in terms of the standard, more Piedmont picking style that he
Hmm.
really developed on his own, mostly on the 12-string guitar. Um, but what I ended up finding was that Gary Davis, uh, he played the song "Saddle It Around," and it sounded so different. And it reminded me of another song, "Spike Driver Blues" by Mississippi John Hurt. And so I was drawn to it just by that. But having known Stefan Grossman for quite a few years, I decided to reach out to Stefan and ask him if he had any information about that specific song. And to my surprise, Stefan he had already done an interview with Reverend Gary Davis, and Gary talked about this song "Saddle It Around" being part of his early years in South Carolina, and he learned it actually from a husband and wife guitar duo that used to travel around. So I first was drawn to the song just for all of that information. But then Stefan told me that it was after uh, Reverend Gary had heard Mississippi John Hurt for the very first time at the Gaslight Cafe. That was the moment where Gary then decided to start picking Saddle It Around for Stephen. So that was the moment that sort of created an inspiration moment for Reverend Gary Davis. So a lot of information came to me through this song, and I just love picking it. And I found out that actually Reverend Gary Davis had a six-string banjo that he played for a while as well. So
Really?
having Big Head Joe on there, yeah, he had his own six-string banjo he played for a while, and apparently some people liked it, some people didn't, which is how all six-string banjos are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're also, I mean, a fantastic banjo player in addition to all the guitar work that you do. Um, I wanted to ask you a million questions about banjo, but we're going to keep it to acoustic guitars as much as we can. But I had to ask you about that big banjo sound that you have in one of these tunes here. Is it a bass banjo? Is that a six string banjo? Can you tell us about that instrument? Because it's such a sonically, it just jumps out and kind of grabs you, even though it's kind of mixed in the background in a way.
Well, that's my good friend Big Head Joe. Now, Big Head Joe is a giant six-string guitar banjo that was
Mm.
he was made in the early 20th century by an African American luthier by the name of Robert H. McGinnis. And so Robert McGinnis made the Clef Club Deluxe banjos for the orchestra of James Reese Europe, who was the famous African American ragtime composer. And he actually helped break the color line at Carnegie Hall very early on. He was also a World War I veteran. And so McGinnis branded these instruments that went from little piccolo banjos all the way to big bass banjos. And Big Head Joe is sort of somewhere halfway in between a
Mm.
large, oversized banjo guitar. So he's not a bass guitar, but an oversized. If you see a standard banjo, the head of it is usually 11 inches diameter.
Hmm.
And so Big Head Joe is an 18-inch diameter uh, banjo guitar. So it's quite large. It actually covers my entire torso up to my neck if I
Yeah.
sit down and play it. So it's a very big instrument. I was drawn to it because I went to a guitar shop, Retrofret in Brooklyn,
Hmm.
and I saw it in the back of the room, and it reminded me of the banjo guitar played by Papa Charlie Jackson, who was a very early country blues guitar player, and he actually specialized playing the banjo guitar, a giant one that looks almost like Big Head Joe. So there's a particular tone to this large banjo. Like there are two tracks. Saddle It Around. I have
Hmm.
Big Head Joe sort of bouncing around in the background doing some licks. And then on Songster Revival, the very last cut, I have him doubling with the plectrum banjo that I'm also playing as well. So on that one, you hear boo, doo, 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 you know.
Hmm.
Um, Big Head Joe's had a couple of modern cameo appearances on great records like Tyler Childers' Long Violent History.
Hmm.
You can hear him picking out the first notes of that Send in the Clowns from that record from a few years ago. Fantastic Negrito featured Big Head Joe on his song um, Highest Bidder, which came out on his last record. But
Hmm.
this is an instrument that's sort of uh, over 100 years old. But now that I've have it in my possession, I've been able to take it into the modern musical world for whatever that may be. And so it
Yeah.
has this very unique tone and a very unique style.
Do you play it similar to a six string guitar?
Oh yes, it's tuned exactly like a guitar,
Oh, okay.
exactly like a guitar. But once you start to play the instrument, you realize that there are different syncopations that can be articulated on the instrument that are different than just a standard guitar.
Hmm.
And especially with Big Head Joe, because it is oversized, you also get a very healthy low tone. And what's interesting about it is that, see, the high end of the instrument is a little bit flat sounding, which is the
Hmm.
hardest thing because it doesn't record well necessarily. And thankfully, with my access to modern technology, I've tried to maximize and make sure that you can hear all the tones of Big Head Joe. But in a lot of the older recordings you hear of the instrument, it's a very thin tone, but the bass notes on this thing are just fantastic to listen to. So you can get a kind of a baritone guitar feel with a little banjo
Hmm.
four string on the top, almost that type of feel.
Yeah.
Especially it was made in the ragtime era, so it really plays well to ragtime 1920s music and
Hmm.
sort of those beautiful little walking melodies that also the guitar became famous on. And so
Yeah.
it's sort of a relic in one way of the transition from banjo to the guitar, but it's also a relic of the First World War because of Robert H. McGuinness and his
Hmm.
particular role with the Clef Club Orchestra. And then me taking it into the 21st century, picking it up in 2014 and making it a part of my my trajectory. I've also written a theme song for it on the last album, Big Head
The
Joe's
instrument
March.
itself has a theme song.
Yeah, Big Head Joe's March. Yeah, like it's on Prospect Hill. It's like a little quills, and you really get to hear Big Head Joe in all of his might.
Wow. So it looks like you had a bunch of instruments on this album, but only one acoustic guitar. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I had just my regular acoustic guitar. This album was also sort of when I was putting the material together, I wanted to focus mostly on guitar, and I
Hmm.
have banjo on the record, but I wanted it to be a guitar-heavy songwriting record. And so I have my Ferlini guitar, which is my main one, but I have
Hmm.
two of them that are almost exactly the same. So on Big Money Blues, I have a Ferlini guitar that is the first guitar I got from Todd Cambio. Now, if you don't know about Todd Cambio, he's a wonderful luthier out of Madison, Wisconsin. Just a really wonderful maker. And when he made my acoustic guitars, I I decided that I wanted to stay with his guitars for pretty much forever. So I have that one on Big Money Blues in open tuning, and then I have my second one on most of the other songs on there. But
Hmm.
one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to split between the acoustic guitar and then also the electric guitar. And so I have the Hoffman the violin bodied acoustic electric guitar,
Hmm.
and that's one of the other features I wanted to have on the record.
You alluded to this earlier, but I wanted to come back to it. You said after your album Black Cowboys in 2018 that you noticed people want to hear more black country music. I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about the musical history behind that, and kind of why you think that is resonating today.
Well, it's interesting with African American country and Western music. You sort of have three, I guess, four eras that really define this phenomenon. So you have first African American folk music that has fueled country music and fed into the roots of country music, and that's you can find any number of stories talking about African American influences on some of the pioneers of country music. So that's one part of it.
Well, can you give us like one example of that? So someone who maybe is what they just want a starting point for that.
Well, sure. You know, Leslie Riddle is one of the first people that tends to come to mind because of the original Carter family.
Hmm.
Also, another fellow by the name of Arnold Schultz comes up when talking about early bluegrass and Bill Monroe and some of those early pioneers.
Hmm.
And all of these musicians either referenced or there were moments where they showed that they had a person that was teaching them a little bit about the music along the way, and they incorporated that into their sound. Like Bill Monroe, he brought a lot of the blues licks that Arnold Schultz was playing on the fiddle, and he called that bluegrass when he brought those things together. So
Hmm.
that's one part of the story. And then you also have people like Leslie Riddle who actually had songs that the Carter family would record later, and those were direct influences that they had. So that's
Hmm.
one part of it. A second part are country and western songs are publishing. It's a publishing community, so people covering country songs is a big part of the industry of country music. And so African American performers have interpreted and reinterpreted songs for years. So everybody from Linda Martell, who was one of the first black women to appear on the Grand Ole Opry, people like that, as well as also people like who was that? Like Bobby Hebb, who did a song called "Sunny," and he was connected with the Grand Ole Opry as well. Also, people like Solomon Burke, who
Hmm.
always had a few country and western songs in their repertoire. And so, these performers many times had styles that were not country and western styles. So Solomon Burke was a performer who did R&B and soul music, but there were moments where he did country and western songs, and that's its own type of genre. A
Hmm.
third part are African American performers who have uh, really had a style that is very in line with mainstream country music. Like we recently lost Charlie Pride. He was probably
Hmm.
the exemplar of this style of an African American performer brought up in the South and playing and singing in a very traditional country style. And now we're sort of in a fourth period. This is the new period of time where hip hop and modern music has taken on country and western, and it's mixing together.
Yeah, you've got the Lil Nas X, Old Town Road. Beyonce did a great country song.
Absolutely. And when I recorded my album Black Cowboys in 2018, I wanted to do a historic album showcasing the relevance of black cowboys and their music on this whole spectrum of country and western. So that was something that was going on all along at the same time. So it was quite a movement to see country and western moving forward. But again, this comes back to people wanting to hear this sound, wanting to hear the authentic sounds of the rural South, the rural African American culture. And this is sort of a new phenomenon, For many years, African American culture has been sort of a forward moving culture where leaving the country behind, moving into the city, and moving forward. So this is sort of the first time that black country music is being demanded by the audience. So for me, I had written Slow Dance with You back in 2008. I just had never had a moment to sit down and record it. And so I wanted to sit down and do that and kind of put a little bit of that flavor of just sentimentality that's so beautiful in country music. But to place it in an African American context, black love, black joy,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
that's what that song's all about.
We're talking a lot about history and tracing kind of music genealogy here. This sounds like the kind of stuff you do with the American Songster radio show. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you've been doing that for what, 3 years now?
Yeah, I'm going into my fourth season of American Songster Radio,
Hmm.
and I started out American Songster Radio several years back in North Carolina on North Carolina Public Radio, and I just wanted to find an outlet so that I could break out of just being known for playing music. I wanted to find a little outlet to show off some of the records I have in my collection, because one of the things that's so wonderful is that over the years I've collected all these records, and I want to show them to people so that they can, learn a little bit about the music that changed my life.
Hmm.
And so I started out with a couple of different interviews to move forward, and over time we've gotten a little bit of traction. So we had it on North Carolina Public Radio for the first 2 years, and then as I made my way to the Midwest, I reached out to WSM Radio and I asked them if they would pick up American Songster Radio. And so ended up being really a wonderful moment where I was also able to talk to some of my musical friends who I've talked with in private conversations for years about roots music. And I thought it was a great way to be able to kind of get a little deeper, get past some of the sort of superficial conversations you get into, and get
Yeah.
into some deep talks and deep issues.
And where can people listen to this now in the fourth season?
There's WSMradio.com. We're
Hmm.
on the fourth Tuesday of every month. And yeah, we just had an episode on Black Dylan covers. And because I cover Guess I'm Doing Fine from Bob Dylan, I did a whole episode dedicated to African American covers of Bob Dylan's songs.
Oh man, I got to go listen to that. That sounds great.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's Betty LaVette, Solomon Burke,
Yeah.
Luther Guitar Jr. Johnson. I mean, it was a fun episode to put together because over the years, there have been hundreds of recordings of African American artists covering Bob Dylan,
Hmm.
but most people just don't even think about it. And so, being a Dylan head myself, I went and I just grabbed all the versions I had of all these different numbers and then I whittled it down into an episode. I might even do a second episode because it was it was a real kick to put it all together.
Yeah.
Like with Betty LaVette, I had "Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight," which is kind of an obscure one off of the album "Infidels" from Bob Dylan, but she does a great soul version of that. But yeah, with American Songster Radio, that's what it's all about. And this season, we're doing it on Traveling Wildfire, and we're breaking down a whole bunch of um, different recordings that are on the album and make an episode around them.
Yeah. That's great. You could do a whole miniseries. I mean, the just the liner notes for that read like a really interesting page turning history. I'm kind of a history buff, so I'm into that. And if anybody's into history, I think they know what I'm talking about when you get a good story, a historical story, and it just keeps connecting and it connects and it connects and it connects, and you want to see what's the next connection. And did you write those liner notes for Traveling Wildfire as well?
I did, Of course, my wife, Vania Kennard, she and I write everything together. She's my main editor and
Mm-hmm.
the person that's my number one cheerleader when it comes to the writing. It's funny with this one, I didn't really want to write an extensive liner note, but when I started to think about it, at first I started by saying, well, I think people are at least going to want to know the traditional songs. So I first started with writing those out, and then I decided let me write a little bit about everything, and so then it just kind of sprawled out into a bigger piece. But yeah, I wrote all that, and funny enough, when it comes to surprises, um, I'm being surprised by the work as much as folks are being surprised by it as well. I got an honorary doctorate the week after I wrote the liner notes. I was writing about my college experience within the essay, and so it really just knocked me out. Life has been very good to me in so many ways, and in that essay, I was glad that I was able to kind of get a few things off my chest that I've been wanting to say, as well as talking a little bit about some of the unique songs and some of the unique ways that they've come to us over 100 years or more.
Let's go back to the Dylan tune you did. Guess I'm doing fine on Traveling Wildfire. How did that come about? And has that song been officially released by Dylan before?
Well, it's funny with that one. They have released it since. There's Bob Dylan, the Bootleg Series Volume 9, which are the Whitmark demos. And the
Hmm.
Whitmark demos are a series of demos that Bob Dylan did between 1963 and 1964 for his publishing company. So back in the old days, when you wanted to sell your song for someone to cover it, you needed to make an acetate record and send it on to the artist, and then they'd listen, and they would come up with their version. So it's a bunch of the acetate recordings he made, and it's all the classic songs, Times There Are Changin', Blowin' in the Wind, all of that.
Hmm.
But within these recordings, there are about 5 or 6 numbers that are songs that he only recorded for these demos, and they show up in his songbooks, but he never recorded them for a commercial release. Um, I found out about the song from an old record store that used to be in Phoenix, Arizona, and they had bootleg um, Dylan CDs, and there was one called the Genuine Bootleg Series, kind of like a spit, like rubbing its nose, thumbing its nose at the bootleg series. So the Genuine Bootleg Series, and on that collection they had "Guess I'm Doing Fine," as well as "Long Time Gone," which was another really great one. I decided to reach out to Dylan's people. I met Bob Dylan very briefly back in 2012 when I opened up for him when I was still back in the Carolina Chocolate Drops,
Oh
and I got to
wow.
shake his hand. So it was like, Bob Dylan's a very secretive guy, and I got to meet him for a minute. It was awesome. And so I reached out to his people and asked, hey, I'd like to cover a number for my next record. And he sent down a few different selections, but Guess I'm Doing Fine was one that I'd known for a long time. So I said, yeah, I'll do Guess I'm Doing Fine. And so that's what happened. And when I arranged it, I kind of wanted to bring it up tempo because it's a slightly slow mid tempo
Hmm.
number in its original form. And as I started to put together, I realized it had sort of a bluegrassy type of feel. I put in a little bit of finger picking guitar. That's kind of a Piedmont style of guitar picking sort of thing within the
Hmm.
C chord. Um, and I thought, man, I wish you could get some fiddle on this. And I thought to myself, I should just reach out to Sam Bush. And I've known Sam Bush for many years now. And I thought he'd get a kick out of it because he was also, last time I heard him playing fiddle, he guested on one of Loretta Lynn's last records she did. He had a guest fiddle part on one of the cuts, and I just remembered that. And then also I had another time where I got to sit with he and Del McCurry when they were just playing banjo and fiddle together, and that was some good stuff to see. And but I thought about Sam, and so I called him up, and he was all for it, and so he put down a wonderful fiddle track for that number. So but it's like I made a homemade jug band.
That's the end of part 1. In part 2, you'll hear about Flemons' Frankenstein custom guitar, how to incorporate traditional music into your set lists, and what makes a good interpretation on guitar. Join us at patreon.com/acousticguitarplus. Part 2 is waiting for you there. The Acoustic Guitar Podcast is brought to you by the team at Acoustic Guitar Magazine. I'm your host, Nick Grizzle. This podcast is directed and edited by Joey Lusterman. Tanya Gonzalez is our producer. Executive producers are Lizzie Lusterman and Stephanie Campos Dalbroy. Our theme song was composed by Adam Perlmutter and performed for this episode by Jeffrey Pepper Rogers. If you enjoy this podcast and want to support us, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/acousticguitarplus or find the link in our show notes for this episode. As a supporter, you'll have access to exclusive bonus episodes, along with other special perks. If you're already a patron, thank you so much for your support.